This is Leisha Holmes, and I'm your host on the Recruiters Recruitment Podcast. And this week's guest is someone who, if you're watching this on video, you'll think she's a Hollywood movie star because she's got this gorgeous glow about her. Joining us from the beautiful royal town of Leamington Spa. I actually believe it is a royal town.
It is indeed.
And somebody that I've had the absolute pleasure to get to know through my amazing community, the Women in Recruitment Leadership, which I seem to be talking about quite frequently lately. If you are interested to know more, it is an invite-only community to female founders and the most senior female leaders in recruitment agencies. Drop me a message and we can chat. But back to this week's guest. This lady has got a phenomenal story and she's really keen to share this with you, our community. And she is one of you. She's a listener and a fan. So without further ado, welcome today to Samantha Hunter, who's the Managing Director and founder of Recruitable Staffing Solutions. Welcome, Sam.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I'm very excited for our audience to get to know you today. So give us your beautiful story, because I think you've got quite a unique story as to why you're here today. Tell us all about it.
Yes, so Recruitable Staffing Solutions is my second venture. So a little bit about me and kind of where my story transpired was I set up my first recruitment agency at the age of 26 to 27. Been in recruitment for roughly about 3, 4 years before that. And then I scaled the business to achieve over 2 million in turnover within my second year. And then
Wow.
I exited after 5 years. And then it led me to then go all over again, start completely again in recruitable staffing solutions. But we are doing things a little bit differently to what we've done in the past.
Ooh, so what did your first business actually do? What industry were you operating within?
So we were operating in manufacturing and engineering
Okay.
and logistics. We're in Recruitable, we now do freight forwarding. So
Ah.
we've kind of added a new arm into the new venture.
Wow. I'm really interested in this because, we all know the stats that female founders, particularly in recruitment, I don't think we're even in single digits. I think it's literally like 1% or something actually managed to succeed in a scale and an exit. What was going right back to that 26-year-old or maybe 25-year-old? I don't know at what point it was an apple in your eye. Did you have a plan to scale and exit a business? Like, just talk us through, if you can remember that first time round, what your intention was.
Yeah, so for me, it kind of stems from my childhood. So I'm an only child, and for me, it was a case of I was brought up going, if you want something, you've got to go and get it. No one's going to give it
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah.
And when I was in recruitment, so I fell into recruitment like everybody else. So
Yeah.
originally, I wanted to do HR.
Okay.
I was a mature student at university, went to do my CPID,
Yeah.
and trained to do HR. And then I went for like a recruitment day. And then there happened to be a recruiter there who then saw me on the recruitment assessment and was like, Sam, we want to bring you into recruitment.
Yeah.
And at first, I was a bit like, oh, do you know what? Like, recruitment's only a small bit of
It
HR. Like,
is.
you
Yeah.
know, I don't really know too much about it. Anyway, I went for it. And then my passion in recruitment just grew from there. And then after a couple of years of being in the industry, I did skilled and technical, and I had the very much like old school training.
Hmm.
So, your KPIs, cold calling, sales competitions, and I was up against some big
Yeah.
guys in these sales competitions, and I was outperforming, and I kind of then got a bit of a bug. Went to another agency who headhunted me from the work that I was doing at my first agency. And then I just went into internal recruitment because as everybody kind of goes, you want to dabble in it a little bit. So I was
Well,
doing
that's because that's the HR element, isn't it? You probably had a
yeah,
curiosity for stakeholder management and understanding what the other side of the coin, what happens when you've placed a candidate, the onboarding, etc. I can see
mhm.
why that would like be inside of you.
Yeah, so I did that for 2 years and I was
Wow.
dealing with over 200 stakeholders,
Gosh.
and it really broadened my knowledge to go
Mm.
in, okay, there's a gap here, which then led me to put a business plan together. Now, I thought that what every recruitment business owner did was go and get investment, and
Okay.
that's what I did. So I put a business plan together. I went out, went online, looked and Googled all these business like investors and
Mm.
private and like, where you get the incubators and all these kind of
Mm.
things.
Yeah.
And I pitched my business plan and I got 4 offers at the time, all different
Wow.
offers. And I then picked who I went with. And that's kind of how it all started, all based off my business plan.
Love
But
it.
because of my background and how long I was in recruitment beforehand, my business plan was very niche. It was down to the penny. I made sure I understood my figures. I made sure that the passion was there and, and that came across, which I think when you look at people who set up their businesses now, it's very easy to forget how important your business plan is.
Oh, absolutely.
It,
And it will adapt and it will change with the market. But if you don't have that plan, you don't have anything to kind of underpin your intentions as a business owner and your
Mhm,
purpose. Yeah,
definitely.
definitely.
And I didn't realize that only 1%, like we've just touched upon,
Mm-hmm.
get investment. And
Mm-hmm.
but I thought that was a given. I honestly did. Like I thought, no, everybody has it, and that's the way forward. But there's challenges and there's like positives and negatives with that come along with that. But within my first year, I very much noticed the the challenges that you have as a young female business owner that if I'm honest, at the very start, I didn't really consider, I didn't really think about.
Such as what?
So I think more of the age bias, the
Right?
stereotyping, I would turn up to a meeting and the first thing you would get asked is, how old are you?
Really?
Honestly, like one time I had a board meeting, first time meeting this individual, it was not even a hello, it was, how old are you, Sam? And it was a case of going on one aspect, you can see that as a positive. You go, oh, thank you, it's a compliment.
No,
But on the
absolutely.
other hand, it can lose you start questioning your credibility and you
Well,
start questioning,
that's the unconscious bias, isn't it? That's
yeah.
what they're implying by saying, "How old are you?" Like, you're not old enough to help me here. Do you think
Mhm.
they would have asked a man that?
Definitely not. Definitely not. But I think how I overcame that, and the first year of like starting up my first agency, that was very much creeping in on a daily basis. And like I said, I even went to one meeting, they shook my hand and said, "Oh, you're very young to be a business owner." And it's because I'm so hands-on, and I still am to this day, I like to lead by example. So for me, I'll be there on your 4 a.m. check-ins. I'll be there on site with my safety boots and my high vis.
Got
I'm
you.
there speaking to candidates. And I think on one aspect, I've even get candidates going, oh gosh, I didn't know you own the agency. And you're like, well, yeah, because you want to be the forefront. But I feel like back then, there was that imposter syndrome creeping in, which is
Mm,
also a bit of a negative. There was that having to prove yourself.
mm,
And, I think if anybody who's looking to go into recruitment now, I think make sure that you do have that resilience and that grit because that's what's
mm.
going to carry you through.
Yeah.
I think if you look at Gen Z, for example, now, they do have a different mindset, but I'm a millennial. So for me, I can adapt quite quickly,
Mm.
to different scenarios. Whereas my 26 young self, it was a challenge. It was really hard, having
Mm.
to face that on a daily
I
basis.
mean, this reminds me of a story that when I was very young entering the workforce. I was actually only 19, and I was in a job at 20. I was running a a property management company, not
Hmm.
recruitment, property. So we had a portfolio of residential properties, and I remember dealing with one of the landlords. He owned about 300 houses on our portfolio, and he'd never actually met me in person. He was based down south, and he was coming up to Manchester to the office. And when he actually walked in, he pretty much walked past me, and I went over and said, I think his name was Gary, and I went over and said, Gary, it's Leisha, and he looked me up and down, and he said, but you're just a kid, and I was like, I'm not a kid, and he said,
Hmm.
I'd honestly thought you were in your 30s by the way you've conducted yourself, and I said, well, that doesn't change just because you've now met me. It's irrelevant. I'm mature. I've run your portfolio. I ran all the maintenance for them. So what you've just said there really took me back, and there'll be listeners now going, we've all experienced that level
Hmm.
of ageism at some point, whether it might have been in a Saturday job, it might be now in our careers. On the other side, I'm over 50, but to hear it from a founder, I find that really disappointing that that was the first thing that was said to you by, people that you were there to help. I just think, how can you make that judgment based on how somebody looks? Because
Hmm.
actually you can get people who are, very blessed to look younger than they are. Like you say, it's just, I find it absolutely flabbergasting. And the fact that would they have said that to a male counterpart? It just, so it's not just ageism, it's sexism as well.
Hmm.
You've had to face a lot of isms, a lot of bias, unfortunately, haven't you, Sam?
Yeah, definitely. But I think also like it's not a case of I think it builds character. And I think that's the
Mm,
key thing is that yes, I face them and I'm still facing them to this day in
right.
some elements, and that's being what we're 6, 7 years into, into my career. And it's a case of a lot of people as well would see it as, oh, she's really young. Your recruitment business is just a lifestyle. It's a
Mm,
lifestyle business. And you're like,
mm,
no, this is my career. This is my identity. It's like what I'm building for the future. Um,
mm. It's a
so I
lot of
think
lot of doubters that seem to be very vocal. So just in terms of you, you've launched a second business. So what led you to exit the first one, and then what made you go again?
so for me, I wanted more. So I got the business up to a point where I was satisfied, but I was very much in a box.
Okay.
And I wanted to kind of branch my wings a lot more and be a bigger and scale more.
Okay. Yeah.
So I decided to exit out of that business and go again. But I think there's the element of remembering that everyone is human. I
Mm,
think it's very easy, as you probably know, like when you're a recruitment founder, it's a case of there's going to be highs and there's going to be lows.
hmm.
And, setting up my business now to when I first set up, the world is completely different.
Yeah.
There's a lot more challenges now than there was back then.
Mm,
There's a lot more uncertainty now than there is
yep.
back then. But I
True.
think that's why the key points is that you've got to really work on your personal development,
Mm,
work on your
mm.
mindset, work on your personal branding and build them long-term relationships because I think that's what
Course.
stead me apart between, switching the businesses. If I didn't have them strong, relationships with my candidates and clients, I think I'd
Yeah.
find it even more challenging now than what I did
Mm.
back then.
Have you this second sort of phase, sort of Sam 0.20, is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Have you gone with investment this time, or are you doing it just by yourself?
I've got another investment.
Ah, you've done it again.
So,
That's
so yeah,
amazing.
smash that ceiling again.
You are
Yeah,
good.
which is really good. But I think as well, it's important to choose your business partner correctly. I think,
Yes.
there are so many people out there, but it's
Mm,
important to make sure that your goals are aligning and making sure that that you are valued for who you are and what you bring,
yeah.
not necessarily what's on that bottom line.
Mm,
Recruitment is all about people at the end of the day and people
there's.
buy it and people buy into people. So if
Mm.
you don't have good core like morals and values, then that is going to transpire. So yeah, I think
But that you could say that on the other side. I think that for people that are looking at potential investors or joint ventures or incubation companies, like you say, there are lots of ways to be invested within as a recruitment founder and launching a new business. But they need to bring something as well. They need to prove their worth. They need to match values. I often say, because I place people like you with investors, and I say it's actually a more important decision than you choosing your future spouse or life partner, because it's
mhm,
actually easier to get a divorce than it is to exit from a business partnership. So I think you should court. I think you should date. Go
mhm,
and meet lots of people, lots of different investors. Of course, do your due diligence. Speak to some of their previous investees, see what the actual investment is, not beyond the cash. What's their level of advisory work, what's their
mhm.
scalability, what are they actually like to work and operate with, to make sure that the values really do run all the way through day-to-day transactions, and it's not just fancy words that they're saying to you. I'm sure these are all things that resonate with you.
Definitely. And, I was lucky again when I did it the second time round that I had three offers this time round. And
Mm,
again, all offered different solutions, different propositions. And you're right, it is, it's such an important decision. Now, there's pros and cons to that, obviously having a business partner and things like that. But I think ultimately if you're on the same page and you've got the
mm,
same goals, then it can work very successfully.
definitely.
For us in our year one, I've already overachieved to what I've done in my first time
Mm,
round.
brilliant.
And that's all because I've got a strong partnership. And I think that's what I
Yeah.
would recommend to any young female business owner is make sure that you've got that circle around you, that you've got, somebody that you can pick up the phone to if you're having a hard day, you can bounce ideas from, that can give you different ways of thinking, you know.
Yes.
And I think that's what my business partner does. I could ring up at any point and go, oh, okay, I'm thinking
What
about
do you think
doing
about?
this. And
Mm,
you can bounce off different ideas and pull from different experiences.
good. because it's not about keeping you in the box. You mentioned that you felt that you were almost restricted last time, but it's about, you've evolved as a business owner. And I think that's really important. So, from a scalability point of view, Sam, how easy do you think it is as a young female business owner to attract similar, and I don't mean necessarily other females, but similar minded people to your values? Like how easy is it to hire for you?
Um, Good question. I think it's a case of you having to pivot and adapt. I think one of the key successes is that you really need to understand your industry. You need to understand your market. As I said, I'm a skilled and technical recruiter. So for me, that's the avenue that I go down. But I build a team around me that understand the
Their
logistics,
markets.
their
Mm.
markets in the same level of detail that I do. But also as well is that I hire people that do want to go that extra mile because
Mm.
ultimately that person can hinder your relationships in the
Mm.
business. And, I recruit people that are forward thinking, that think outside the box, that have different ideas, but are not afraid to share the ideas.
Good.
That, for example, we're looking at bringing on apprentices at the minute.
Great.
Like in September, where we can then build the next 360 consultants, that have a different way of thinking, a different way of recruiting. It's not about hitting the phones every day. It's not about door knocking every day.
Okay.
It's about, creating the videos and social media and all these different
All
ways.
of the things.
Yeah, whereas back, again,
Mm.
back when I was 26, it wasn't about that back then
No.
to what it is now. And I think that's what I definitely look for is somebody who
Mhm.
wants to go that extra mile because for me, that's what I do for all of my candidates and customers.
And I think that actually you're, just to go back to part of your career journey, because you've been on the end user side, you've been in internal. And this is where I will put my flag in the sand and forevermore say that people that think that going into an internal recruitment role is easy, she's doing inverted commas, it has always really got my goat because I've felt like that since the recession of 2008 when you saw so-called failed recruiters going into internal. I'm like, what's easy? What is easy about being sat with your stakeholders? You
Mhm.
have got no escape. You cannot avoid the phone call. They are there and they are demanding those people in those positions. So it gives you an insight that no external recruiter from a recruitment agency could ever have. I've never done internal actually, but my business partner Laura has, and she did it. She's done it on two occasions in her career, and it gives that slightly different edge to. I get where you're coming from. I get your pain point. I understand things like onboarding. You can give so much value to your clients because you've seen what that onboarding experience is like. So that's where you're brilliant. I love that you're going down the apprentice route, Sam. That makes me go all goosebumpy.
No, I'm very excited as well. But you're right, internal
Mm.
recruitment, like you said, there is no hiding. Like I've
Mm.
had to stand up in a boardroom full of 30, 40, senior members of staff and explain what went wrong in their hiring
Oh my
processes.
God.
To the point where, you know, I changed the model for them. I put different processes that they didn't think of previously to help get their hiring a lot quicker and more efficient, to the point where there was like a PSL, there's like over 15 recruiters on there, and like some of them were just submitting CVs just because it was the thing to do.
Yeah.
And I was going, no, you've
No.
got to be selective.
Yeah.
You've got to have value. And ultimately, because internal recruitment,
Mm.
you are the face of it. So if another agency gets it wrong, that internal recruiter is going to have to face that stakeholder and say, oh, sorry, I used that agency, but they didn't quite get it right. And like you said, I think for me, it's helped me with what I'm doing now because
Yeah.
I know the importance of you don't just send a CV for the sake of it.
No,
You've
of
got to understand your candidate, got to
course.
understand their motivations, why they're looking to move, culture fit.
Mm.
The list goes on.
It does. No,
But
it's really valuable. And, and
definitely.
and what, one of the things that you're clearly very passionate about is that experience for all the stakeholders. So it's for the candidates, the clients, and the people that are working for you with the people, the journey that you're going on. And as a role model of a young female founder and recruiter, day-to-day recruiter, you've got a captive audience here, Sam. What can we do better as an industry to ensure that that young female of you, age 26, to feel seen? Like what more can we do? Magic one time.
Oh, do you know, I think it's taken the time to understand that person.
Mm.
I've been in situations in the past where, let's just use a different example in the sense of like going to buy a car. I went to go and buy a car. I had my stepkids in the back of the car, and they said, "Oh, are you here to buy your very first car today?" Sorry. They didn't ask the questions, didn't look at the car that I pulled
Yeah.
up in or anything like that. It was, so you need cheap insurance because it's your first car. No,
Wow.
so, and I think if you relay that to the recruitment industry, I think it's taken that time to understand that individual, but
Mm.
also not just take it, never judge a book by its cover. Prime
Yeah.
example, really
Yeah.
get to understand what experience and what does that person, what can they offer to me? You know,
Yeah.
um, I think that's what the industry could do a little bit better is just making sure that treating everybody as a separate entity, not just
Mm.
grouping everybody together.
Well, I mean, I think we've got a long way to go. And one of our amazing podcast partners is Joe Major from Diversity and Recruitment. And for me, the living and breathing element of what diversity and inclusion actually really means is what you've just described, which is not making bloody assumptions.
Yeah.
I just wobble my head that anybody would make that. But you're absolutely right. This isn't just specific to the recruitment industry. Clearly, there's a lot of industries that still just go based on how somebody looks as opposed to what is their story, what can I do to support you. So I guess to answer the question, then what you're saying is we need to ask better questions when we are
Mhm.
engaging with a potential employee or even a potential supplier. This isn't just about hiring. This is about, even engaging with suppliers that, tell me your story. We need to be
Mhm.
better at listening then.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
And then in terms of the actual onboarding side, how do you see it fitting into things like the hybrid debate? Where are you on that?
Good question. So for me, I think it's a case of if it's like a hybrid position, it's
Mm,
that work-life balance because it's very easy. If you're quite young, you're there to prove yourself, aren't you? Ultimately,
mm,
you want to prove that you should be in that seat and that you deserve that seat at the table. And I think it's a case of, but ultimately that can lead to a negative side. That could lead to burnout. That could lead to, self-doubt and also it can lead to many like other things. So I think hybrid is really good, I think.
mm,
And what I have found is that a couple of days in the office, brilliant. You get that social buzz, you get that interaction, you can work with the team, but ultimately being at home on some days, just do your admin and just kind of like be in your own environment, I think is really positive.
mm.
But ultimately, I think there's a lot of managers that potentially don't trust their teams, which I
Yeah.
think is kind of like the topic of conversation, isn't it? Going, if I sent my employee to work from home, will they do the work that's required? But
Mhm.
I think that links back to your hiring. I
Yeah, it
think if you
does.
ask better questions, like we said, you understand the candidate. You've ultimately there's an element of trust anyway with them, and that you should give to them.
Do you know
Then
what I always counter? How do you know whether they're doing the job sat at the desk in the office? Right? How do you
Mhm.
know? Do you go and sit next to them and watch them doing their job, or are you trusting them on the outcomes? Well, then why is that any different if they are sat at home? You can then still measure it on outcomes. And so
Yeah.
I know this, I hope nobody's eye rolling the fact that we are talking about this because I almost feel like it's one of those evergreen conversations because post COVID, I don't think this debate is going anywhere. I still have clients messaging me, and this is June 2025. So 5 years after COVID saying, literally, I had one on Monday. What's everyone doing in terms of hybrid versus office? And I can give data of what we're doing because it's one of the things we do measure on based on our placements where people are. And my absolute mantra flag in the sand is actually stolen from when Bruce Daisley, bit of a shout out there to Bruce, who was the CEO of YouTube and Google for UK and EMEA. He came on the show in 2021. So this is when it was still a very prominent topic. And he's got a podcast and it's all around workplace culture. So he uses data from across, multi-billion pound companies. And, plagiarizing that entire episode, if you go back through the archive and search Bruce Daisley, you can have a listen. It's probably still really relevant. He's from the Midlands. There you go. He and I talked about this, that it has to be case by case in each
Mhm.
business. And it comes down to he was the one that posed that question. If you are productive, it shouldn't really matter. But for the things that you've said, that's where people should come together for creativity, for ideas, for creating strategies, for sharing information. Have those anchor days where you're doing team-based activity, particularly if you're going down that apprentice trainee route. It's vital for them to have that osmosis, see the behaviors. But then if you're creating, let's face it, we're all adults. If you're creating an adult culture, then you should have those outcomes indicators as to whether somebody's being productive at home. But that's where I think anyone listening who's got troubles with, we're thinking about mandating back in the office, just ask yourself the question, how do you know they're even working when they're sat in the office? How do you know?
Mhm.
There's your
But
answer.
also it's the activity. So like you've just mentioned, is if the results are there, then you know the activity is being done. And I think that's the thing in recruitment. You like your results is all based on the activity that you've done. So if you're having a down month, predominantly you have to
Mm.
look back and question what activity was I doing
Yep,
3, 4 months prior.
absolutely.
And I think that's, that's also something that I do. And I say with my teams as well, going, the
Mm.
activity that you do today will impact your desk in 2 to 3 months' time.
Yep.
There's that 3 month cycle, isn't there? Going,
Mm.
it takes 3 months to pretty much convert a
Mm.
client
Yeah,
these
yeah.
days at the moment, and especially in the market that we're in. So make sure that you do that input. But ultimately, you have to vary your tactics, like we spoke about. And I
Mm.
think that's what's changed in the industry. There's so many different ways to do business development now then, and there's so many ways to connect with people now that are more instant than what there was sort of 5, 6 years ago.
Yeah.
But I
So,
also think, when we spoke about COVID, I
mm.
think for me, pivoting the business was such a key point in my career. So we were very fortunate that we dealt with a toilet company that did with toilet paper, for
Okay.
example. So
Wow.
during COVID, you can imagine
Yeah.
that was a tick all around.
Yeah.
And prior to that, it wasn't something that we were considering as a business in our manufacturing division. It was a case
Mm.
of we were just looking at like production lines and looking at different kind of projects. And then this company came about, and for us, it just, you know,
Cash cow.
well, yeah, it just like
Literally.
elevated the business
Mm.
massively. But on the
Mm.
back of that, though, I think if you don't pivot in these tough challenges, I think you can get left behind. But
Agreed.
don't pivot in the sense of like if you are for example, let's look at construction. So at one point, the construction industry was through like
Yep.
it
Through the
booming.
roof. Hmm.
Everybody wanted to be in construction. But if you don't understand that market, your
Very different.
credibility is just going to fall through the
Yeah.
roof. And
Pivoting doesn't mean going and doing something totally random. It means looking at the relationships you have
Mhm.
and then utilizing them. So for me, a really sensible pivot for someone like yourself that's maybe doing skilled and technical is looking at saying, right, we could go and do the executive side of that because your decision makers are the C-suite, they are the production directors, they're the sales directors, whatever it might be. You could then launch a technical sales division. That's a pivot.
Mhm.
The freight forwarding, that's a pivot. This is not you saying, right, well, this is the market we're in. I know we're going to go and do actuarial recruitment and legal. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And that's where, that was one of the key words of COVID, wasn't it? The pivot. And that's where I saw so many people go on these basically wild goose chases. And it's just, I think you've got a lot of wisdom that you can share. And that's where your story is. Your intention of this podcast before I pressed record was you wanted people to have takeaways from
Mhm.
today's episode. Well, I mean, gee whiz, if people haven't been making notes and scribbling away, not least, and I know we haven't really touched on this, but the fact that I think we all have a responsibility, every single person listening now, wherever you are, we have a responsibility to not just Gen Z, but Gen Alpha, the future workforce, that we have to ensure we are creating jobs for them. Because at the moment, any article, any podcast that they watch or any TikTok, it's all like AI is going to take all the first entry jobs. No, we have a choice. We have a
Mhm.
choice. And what you're doing is setting that stall out. So if it's possible for you to look at apprenticeship routes, what would your advice be? Like, do you work with a specific provider or do you speak to a few?
Yeah, so we work with a Pacific provider, and I think that is the way forward. It's also you can mold and you can share and you can build on that individual. Whereas, I think bringing people from different companies and things like that
Mm.
now, I think
Yeah.
is a bit of a risk
Mm.
because ultimately they've got their set relationships. And I think a lot of people in recruitment are not looking to move. They're not
Mm.
looking to leave their
Mm.
desk, and
Mm.
rightly so. And I
Yeah,
understand
yeah.
it. They've put the hours, they put the effort in, and I think yeah, I think the next generation is going to be so key for the
Yeah.
recruitment industry. And I think if
Yeah.
we can, like you said, if we can put them on an even level playing field and give them the tools, they're going to carry that
And
legacy.
learn from them, because this is the generation that's grown up with
Yeah.
TikTok. It's grown up with AI. It's grown up with all these tools. They can teach us a lot about it. And ironically, even as a rec to rec, I agree with everything you've said. Why would people who are doing well in their market move? So you have to think more diversely. You have to think a lot more strategically as a business owner. And what a gorgeous way to finish our brilliant episode. You've been brilliant, Sam, and I wish you all the very best. And we can't wait to see your journey and what happens next. And, if anybody wants to get in touch, please, if you connect to Sam, please mention the Recruiters Recruitment podcast. And I hope you've enjoyed being on the show today. Sam, how was it?
It was brilliant. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us. So
Yeah.
that's a really good point that you've made there, Alison, around, we discuss between the founders any new member that is proposed to us, because we want to make sure from, like you say, from a value perspective, and that, that's something that I know you spoke about at our last event in July, Alison, around, what, I guess, the value and the contributions that we want to make sure people get from being part of the community. Can you just give a summary of what you said to our members in July?
Yes. So I'm sure I speak for all of us here that there are effectively three things which all conveniently begin with V that we want our members to get from this. The first is visibility, and that's really important because a lot of women and others, but women have experienced this. They're not speaking up in meetings. They're not being asked to be on panels or be guests on podcasts and whatever. And therefore their career actually suffers. They don't get the introductions and the visibility and that go along with those things. So visibility is key. And a number of our members have really proven that, haven't they? The second is about, we want our members to go back with value and to be valuable in their business, so that they're not only developing themselves, they are going back to businesses and bringing new information, new insights, new approaches, whether or not it's strictly in their job remit. So by way of example, if a number of people have moved away from the sales side of the business into more operational roles, but actually being closely involved with the profit and loss, hopefully profit, is actually, it's everyone's responsibility. So they can go back and make genuine, valuable contributions about those kind of things. And then the third is validated by the mutual support that our community offers.
I love alliteration. That's amazing. Well, look, you've listened to this podcast to the end, so thank you for doing that. And I hope that you've felt inspired, and I hope you've felt enamored, enjoyed by listening to, these amazing co-founders of mine who have got huge respect and admiration for all of you. And, if you are genuinely interested, please do drop, as I say, any of the co-founders a message and we can take it from there. But thank you so much for being on the pod. This has been so much fun. We could talk all day. That's the reality. But sadly, we have come to the end of our time. So thank you for joining me on the Recruiters Recruitment podcast.